Today's daily thought comes from Philippians 4 verse 11. It's a verse that many of you will have heard before. For I have learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. I wonder if you can identify with Paul when he utters these words. Have you, over these past months, been able to say, I am content? Maybe you've enjoyed this time. There's less stress, it's been relaxing, free from the rat race. You've had more time to spend with your family and your children, more time for yourself. You have felt content. Or maybe the opposite is true. It has been a very lonely time. You may have lost your job and there are no future prospects and the financial worries that come along with it. Perhaps you have an ailment of the body or the mind that has been made worse over this period. Is it possible to be content in such circumstances? Let's consider what Paul was going through and why he was able to say this. First of all, he had learned it. A lot of Paul's learning had been at the feet of Gamaliel, but this learning was different. It was at the feet of the Lord Jesus Christ, and it was through much suffering that he had learned to be content. Paul hadn't had it easy. 2 Corinthians 11 verses 25 to 27 reads like this. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of mine own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toiling, sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirsting, fasting often, in cold and nakedness, besides the other things what come upon me daily. I think we can say he had endured hardship and suffering. But despite all of this, he had learned to make the best of every situation he found himself in. Through it all, he did not lose trust in God. He went from one situation to another, and he found himself in very difficult circumstances. Maybe your life is like that. One thing after another seems to happen to you, and you wonder, is it possible to keep trusting in God and to remain content? There were many hard lessons in the life of Paul, and we too have many hard lessons in our lives. 34 years ago, I had just had my second child, a baby girl, and I couldn't be happier, already having a boy. She was born in January, and by March I wasn't able to lift her out of the crib, and I couldn't put my feet on the floor without excruciating pain. I knew something was wrong, and after many tests, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I was just 26. This wasn't good news, having 2 children to look after now. I know there are many of you out there who have been through worse and many difficult circumstances, but can you say, I have learned in whatsoever state I am to be content? Jeremiah Burroughs has written a book that describes this contentment as a rare jewel. In it he quotes, Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Paul knew the secret of being content, and we can know it also. Verse 13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It was in and through Christ that he was able to endure so much. His ability to survive all that he went through came from an inner strength that only comes from knowing Christ in our hearts. Maybe you feel content without Christ in your life, but when the difficulties come, can you say with the hymnist, when all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. These are encouraging words. They teach us that it is possible, by the grace of God, to be content in our situation today, in the world we live in, and in the trials and difficulties we face each day. It's not our natural temperament, it needs to be learned. You will not find this contentment in the world. Why? Because society today is permeated by a spirit of greed and not gratitude, getting rather than giving, self rather than others first. This contentment does not depend on outward circumstances. To quote Jeremiah Burroughs again, there is nothing outside us that can keep our hearts in a steady, constant way, but grace within the soul. I trust you know God's amazing grace in your life that leads to true contentment. Thank you.